pop your hands up if you or a family member or a friend have been affected by a lifelong health condition. I would think nearly everybody. Have you had to have a conversation with somebody, or maybe with a young person, because somebody's been diagnosed or been given the news that they're living with a lifelong health condition? Again, probably most of us have had to do that. What if you could have a conversation with somebody that could possibly prevent them living with a lifelong health condition? Would you grab that opportunity? Okay. I really passionately believe in the power of conversation being one of the best prevention tools we have as human beings. We can converse, we can talk. I appreciate it's ironic standing here delivering a monologue when I'm advocating for dialogue. To put this into context, I want to talk to you today about sex and about sexual health. And if we're talking about us Brits here, that tends to turn ears off, but I hope you'll keep listening. Sex actually turned my life upside down. 12 years ago, my life was turned upside down because of sex. We all know there are outcomes of sex. We all are the outcomes of two people having had sex, even if we don't want to think what our parents were doing 9 months before we were born. For me, there were 3 major outcomes of sex. So 12 years ago, in an 18-month period, I became a mum, I became a widow, and I was diagnosed with HIV. 3 major implications to my life of sex. Life was turned upside down. My beautiful son, who's sat here today, cringing that his mother's constantly banging on about sex and sexual health. The death of my partner to an AIDS-defining infection, and my own lifelong health condition. I'm living with HIV. I use that story now, and it's taken me all around the world to share my story and how our precious family of 3 became a family of 2, and how that happened and why that happened, and the conversations that we can have that actually might prevent that happening to another family. If we go back 12 years, and I'll share a little story. Benjamin, my partner, had been at work on the Friday, and he came home complaining of a headache, and he went to bed. I thought he had man flu, and I really thought that's how serious it was. And man flu is very serious if you've ever suffered from it. So he went to bed, but by the Sunday, so 2 days later, he clearly wasn't well, and so we had to call for an ambulance, and we were taken to the hospital. He was poked and prodded and tested and interrogated as they tried to decide what on earth was wrong with him. They didn't know, they couldn't work it out. But he was declining, and 3 days later, in a neurological intensive care unit, they said, "We don't know what is wrong with him, and we're only going to find out through the post-mortem." Benjamin died 5 hours later, peacefully, calmly, in a side room, and we left none the wiser. It took 5 months for the coroner's report to come through, and I went to the GP to sit with him to go through this document. They're quite weighty, they're quite macabre. I also found it fascinating, but I also had no idea walking into that GP appointment that life was once again going to turn upside down. Life really did turn upside down, because not only did I walk out of the GP surgery clutching the coroner's report, I also walked out with a piece of paper sending me for a blood test to be tested for HIV, something which had never entered my consciousness, my thought processes. It wasn't in my life. And my only touch point of HIV at that point was Mark Fowler in EastEnders. So off I went to be tested. My test came back positive, and so of course our child had to go for testing too. By whatever miracle, they're HIV negative, and I'm grateful every day that that's how that panned out. But it also meant then I could actually focus on, okay, I'm now a single parent, I'm now living with a lifelong, hugely stigmatized health condition. What's next? How do I deal with this? And what I chose to do is I went to a local support group, and I spoke to them, and through that group, the BBC got in touch. And they were really struggling to find somebody who ticked the boxes that I tick. I am a heterosexual, white woman living with HIV. And they couldn't find somebody who ticked those boxes that was willing to stand up and say, I'm living with this virus. I don't tend to do things by halves. And so when they asked if I would take part in the programme, I said yes. Jane and I spent the day with Stephen Fry at our house, and we had a great day. And they filmed, and we talked, and we conversed, and we chatted about all sorts, far beyond the few minutes that made it into the programme. And actually, it was a really empowering experience to take part and to stand up and say, actually, people, please hear what I have to say. Please consider it. Please maybe go get tested. That was the start of my sort of public speaking and opening up about what happened to our little family and our story. So as I said, since then it's taken me all around the world to share what happened to us. And a couple of years ago I then set up a social enterprise because I truly believe in the power of conversation and enabling conversations. So what myself and our team do is we encourage young people and the professionals who work with them to tackle the conversations that actually lots of adults would much rather avoid and just not have. And that's not good enough. So the favourite part of my job, my favourite days not in the office, are when I get to go into secondary schools and I get to sit with young people and talk to them and hear what they're up to. And what am I hearing? It's frightening. We have a generation failed. We have a generation with very little, if not zero, sexual health knowledge. They have very often poor communication skills, and they need help with all of those things to actually have the healthy, happy lives that they truly deserve and should be. We all want those things for our children and for our young people and for our next generations. These young people also don't have awareness of the icebergs and the tombstone campaigns when the HIV epidemic hit in the 80s that most of us in this room will remember. Those days are gone, and these young people are not high risk enough to warrant a dedicated campaign talking to them. So what I see in schools is often that they may learn about HIV, when we're looking at this specifically, as a virus. And they may have very much a biology-based lesson. So they may see this is what a virus looks like, this is how it replicates, and this is the job it does. That's all well and good, but that piece of education is not going to keep you safe when you want to get jiggy and intimate with somebody. So they may then learn about condoms. And actually what that tends to look like, if they do that in schools, is that the child will sit in the back of the class and somebody over there will really awkwardly put a condom on something that looks nothing like many penises I've ever seen and expect through osmosis that I will learn that technique. There aren't many techniques that we expect people to learn through watching it once and never again. Heaven forbid if we taught first aid in that way, it would be, the outcomes would be frightening. So what do I want to see? And what do I talk to young people about? Well, actually, we have a very different looking toolkit in the UK today. And that toolkit contains 5 main things. The first one, it's a given that we need to be talking about condoms, but we need to talk beyond conception prevention and the heteronormative language of mummy and daddy, and actually what we're preventing is pregnancy, because it does a disservice to all of the range of genders and sexualities that we have that actually a condom doesn't necessarily apply to, or actually the act that you're doing, is a condom the appropriate one? So that's something we need to explore beyond. The second one is testing and actually accessing sexual health services, because those mythical places, they do exist, are often clouded in mystery and shame and stigma. We need to educate young people to actually access and turn to support, to get help and actually talk to people about their sexual health. In the same way a young person, I would hope, would turn quite happily to call the GP or to make a dentist appointment. Sexual health needs to become akin to those things to live well. The third thing that we're looking at then is treatment as prevention. And actually myself, as a HIV positive woman on treatment, if I maintain my treatment and for 6 months maintain an undetectable viral load, which means if you test my blood you will find an undetectable level of the virus, I'm actually not infectious to a sexual partner. And that's massive news, because by increasing testing and increasing people on treatment, we could actually end new infection. And why would we not want that? So the next one is another use of treatment which actually helps people maintain their HIV negative status. And again, young people are not learning that these 2 tools exist. A little bit like the contraceptive pill, you can have the contraceptive pill that you take on a regular basis to prevent conception. You can also take the morning after pill after the event when you think, okay, maybe I need some coverage here. And actually we have treatments available to do a similar job to prevent HIV infection. Treatments that can be taken before or after exposure to prevent a HIV positive diagnosis. Again, why are young people not learning that we have these tools available and actually they might be appropriate to them? They're not appropriate for everybody in the same way the contraceptive pill isn't. But they are options, and options are always better. Now the most important part of this toolkit for me is the 5th component. And this component is exactly what I'm advocating for. It's having a conversation. Because if we don't have the skills to talk to one another, then the R, the relationships part of sex education, when I firmly believe in putting the R at the beginning, not the SRE that we talk about, actually means that we can then have the skills and the ability to have really healthy relationships in every part of our life, whether that's with friends, with intimate lovers, with family, in workplaces. Because actually, if we can have a conversation, we can negotiate consent. We can talk about our likes and our desires and our pleasure. We can talk about negotiating risk and actually what's appropriate for ourselves, because our levels of risk, everybody in this room will have a different level. It also means that we can talk about what's important to us and actually what's appropriate and what's not. Why would we not want to open up that conversation and have those skills to allow people to have really good conversations? And yes, they may then use those skills to talk about sex, and heaven forbid, what's the worst thing that can happen? They may not live with a lifelong health condition. So I'd like to ask you again, if you had the opportunity to sit with somebody and have a conversation that may prevent that person living with a lifelong health condition, would you grab the opportunity? Thank you.